I used to work at one of those 24/7 Walmart supercenters. I was right out of high school, a 19-year-old female, and worked as a cashier for 2 terrible years where I was subjected to all kinds of abuse from customers and coworkers alike. I was screamed at, slammed into the register face first, groped, and even farted on once because this old lady was mad that the oranges were priced each and not by the pound. And I'm not even exaggerating. However, the time that sticks out in my head the most is the time that a customer tried to follow me home. I had just started my shift, and the second I got to the register, I had a line that was 10 people long. For some reason, the Walmart I worked at never had enough registers open, so people were usually really mad and impatient by the time they got to me. I get right to work and keep a smile plastered on my face while making many mandatory small talk. How do you do? How are you? Did you find everything? Most customers were polite, but not very interested in talking, so it was easy to fall into a bit of cashier robot mode. I get this guy who only had 2 items, yogurt and Band-Aids. I ring him up in a record time and neatly bag it up, but the customer doesn't seem to be paying any attention. He wouldn't look at me or answer my greeting. He just stared right down the conveyor belt. Maybe he was just a bit zoned out. The conveyor belt didn't look too dirty. I hadn't had a chance to wash it yet because the second I walked over to the register, people lined up. Side note, always bag your produce. The conveyor belts get really nasty. I tell the man his total, which was something like $4.36, and he starts fishing in his pocket for the exact change without looking up. Inwardly I groan, but I keep my customer service smile fixed in place while I wait. He is wearing one of those muddy brown denim jackets with lots of pockets, and as he rifles through them, I kept catching whiffs of stale BO and cigarettes. His hands were pretty dirty too, and all dried out from the cold weather. He dumps out an assortment of change on the counter, still not looking at me, and I begin to count it up. Everything is uncomfortably quiet. I can feel the eyes of every customer waiting in line boring into me, all except for the guy that was now digging in his pants pockets too. He was about 30 cents short. I let him know once I was sure that he wasn't going to find any more coins. It was then he looks at me, making this scrunched up face. His eyes were very dark brown, almost black, and they pierced right into me, accusingly, as if he thought I was lying or something. While he was watching, I counted everything. It's only 30 cents. Can't you give me your employee discount? No, that's against the rules, I answered apologetically. Do you want to put something back? I wasn't about to get fired for giving someone my discount, which was only 10% if you were wondering. He wasn't the first person to ask for it, but most people pretended that they were joking. He was definitely not joking. No, I want them, he said, glaring at me. I was beginning to wish that he would start staring at the conveyor belt again, instead of me. He was making me pretty uncomfortable. If I had 30 cents in my pocket, I would have just paid for it myself, just to get this guy to leave. He reaches over to take the bag, but I turn the little bag carousel, so he can't. That was probably a stupid move on my part, but it wasn't like I could just let him steal, right? If my register was short 30 cents, my supervisor would be all over me. I know you get a discount. Just plug it in. He completely blows up at this point, but I just shake my head and look at the other customers, probably with a deer in headlights expression. People are watching, but no one does anything. This is just something inconveniencing them, even though I'm actually pretty scared. I already started flashing my register light so that the CSM would come over, but they were notorious for taking their sweet time. I'll get a CSM, but it might take a few minutes, I nervously offer, but the man just goes off and goes on about how much he needed it. He leaves it before the supervisor comes over, grabbing all of his change and shoving them all into his pocket before stomping off. I'm relieved that he's gone and continue working in uneasy silence. Everything seemed to go back to normal after that. My shift ends at midnight, and I managed to clock out on time for once. I didn't have a car, and would normally call my mom to come and pick me up, but she was out of town, and it was too late to call anyone else, so I decided to walk rather than waste money on a cab. I lived about 20 minutes away, and felt pretty safe walking because you didn't really tend to run into people at that hour. After a few minutes walking, I noticed this car driving really slowly behind me. The speed limit was 45, and this car was probably going about 10 miles per hour. I got a bad gut feeling and started to walk a little faster while trying to rationalize it. It could have been someone who wanted to offer me a ride home or get directions. But no, whoever it was stayed behind me and did not try to pull up next to me at all, even though they were going really slow. After about 5 minutes of this, the car finally turns off into one of the neighborhoods. I was relieved, but it was short-lived. The driver parked his car on the curb and gets out of his car. He then comes jogging up to me. I realized immediately that it was the yogurt Band-Aid guy. He was wearing the same muddy brown jacket and staring at me with those dark eyes. I turn around and start jogging down the sidewalk, which is kinda icy, and he just jogs right up next to me. I can actually hear the change jiggling in his pocket. He doesn't say anything at first, so I just try to run faster without slipping. Had this guy been sitting in the parking lot for hours, waiting for me to get off work? Apparently so. I feel him staring at me, and I turn my head to look at him while still running as fast as I could on the ice. I thank my lucky stars that there was fresh gravel laid out, or I probably would have slipped in a classic horror movie cliche. "What color is your underwear?" he asked. The question horrified and disgusted me, so my immediate reaction was, "Don't be a creep," and I punched him right in the face. It hurt my hand like a bitch, but he stops running for a second and bends forward, clutching at his face. I swear I heard him say, "Okay," but I just kept running and was too scared to look back. I'm not sure if he kept following me after that, but I didn't run straight home because I was scared of him figuring out where I lived. When I did make it home, probably an hour later, I went to my landlady's apartment first and told her what happened. I was really shaken up, and I told her if she saw a suspicious guy around the building, she should call the police. My mom was out of town, and she didn't answer any of my calls, so I watched Disney movies until I was calm enough to go to sleep. The next day, I told my managers about what happened, but they didn't really care. In hindsight, I probably should have called the police, but I was young, and I thought that if it was necessary, my management would have told me to do so. Don't know why I thought that, considering they had a way of not really caring about employees. I felt pretty angry that they didn't take me serious or care that I was scared. I wanted to go home early because I was scared that the guy would show up again, but they told me I couldn't and made me go work the registers. I quit shortly after. I never did see Yogurt Band-Aid guy again, but it's been about 10 years, and I'm not sure if I would even recognize him if I did. So this actually happened to me this morning. I was dropping off my fiance at work around 5 a.m. On the way home, I noticed this car speeding towards me. Nothing really unusual about that because I live on the countryside and we have a lot of open roads, so people tend to drive fast in the mornings and late at nights. What was worrying was that he was just tailgating me and wouldn't overtake even though there was plenty of space and time for him to do so because it was a wide open road. He was literally inches away from the back of my car at one point, and I honestly thought that this crazy ass dude was going to hit me. I have front and back dash cams, which he would have had to seen because they both have flashing red lights on them. I was getting closer to my house and he was really close behind me at this point. I wasn't sure if he was following me or just mad at the world, so I take a different turn than I normally do, trying to get away from this dude, and he follows me. Perhaps a coincidence. I've never really used this road on the way home, and now I'm starting to panic. Why was he following me? Did he think I was someone else? I've had this car for a few months, so it couldn't be that. I get towards the roundabout, and he overtook me, then blocked off the exit, refusing to move. I had so many thoughts going through my head. I thought I was going to die because this stupid psycho had it out for me. This was all within 30 seconds of him stopping in front of me. I just sat there for a moment, like what the hell do I do? I wouldn't be able to turn around quickly, as the road was very narrow. Out of pure luck, he stalled his car, and I turned onto the wrong side of the road to get around the roundabout. I drove as fast as I could to the next roundabout, and took a right turn, but I could still see his lights behind me, maybe 500 yards down the road. I saw a little road with a few offshoot turnings. I've taken my car down these little roads hundreds of times. I knew where each one goes. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it. I was shaking like crazy at this point. I heard a car heading towards my way, but it took a different turn. I waited a few minutes to make sure I could get out without him noticing me. I sped out and rang the police. I put them on loudspeaker and explained everything that had just happened within the last 30 minutes. They told me to take a breath and try to relax and to drive to the nearest police station, which was about 6 miles from where I was. Soon as I get back on the road, there he was, right behind me, and had literally turned off his lights and snuck behind me. I'm crying on the phone to this woman, saying he's right there, and I was scared that he was going to hit me or something. I got to the police station, and he sped off screeching something at me down the road. I handed the police my memory card from the dash cams, and they sent 2 officers to follow me home. I put my car in the garage, then honestly sat there crying, furious at what just happened. I take my fiance to work 4 days a week, and I have to pick him up again in a few hours, and I'm terrified I'm going to see that car again.
I got followed in the subway. Let me give you context. I was 18 at the time, living in a city up north, but going every day to my local theater school in Paris, which is about a 1-hour train ride. Parisian people are known to be grumpy and very individualistic. That's important for the following story. My school is located in the 19th district, which is very poor and known for being unsafe. That day, I took the train and arrived at the train station Paris Gare du Nord, a couple of stops from my school. As I head to the subway, I saw a man smiling at me. I didn't smile back. Even with all the crowd around, I saw that he was following me while waiting for the subway a couple of minutes later. Again, I didn't really pay attention, but I kept an eye on him just in case. As we were waiting, I saw him starting to speak with, I suppose, some friends that came to him. So I took out my phone and just forgot about it. The train arrived, and he got on right behind me. I sat down and my heart started to pound. There were 5 or 6 men around me speaking in a foreign language. The train wasn't empty, but no one was really looking in my direction. Maybe I was overreacting at the time, but I took my phone out anyway to ask help from my friends at school just in case, telling them that some guys were following me on the subway. All of a sudden, the men started to make a circle around me, and they looked very angry, speaking loudly in their language. People around us were looking, but no one said a thing. My station was next, and I decided to force my way through. One of them resisted, but eventually I got through them. I walked super fast to get out of the subway station, but they followed closely behind and were shouting at me. One of them even grabbed me, and thank God one of my friends from school arrived with a retracted knife in his hand. He just grabbed me out of the station, and we heard the guy shout behind me. Guys, I don't know if your game was to scare girls, but let's not meet again. I just discovered this sub and thought it might be a good place to share my story. About 3 months ago, my wife, then fiance, and I were driving from Oregon to Arizona. We were in a part of Nevada that was in the middle of nowhere. We were on the end of a 70-mile stretch with no cell service, and it was midnight. My wife is a small girl, only 5'1", 100 pounds. I often joke when I go to see her at work, oh, it must be take your child to work day. She's that small. It was my wife's turn to drive at this point, so I reclined in my seat, out of view, and fell asleep. She shakes me awake and says, "This guy's been following on my ass for a while. I don't know what his issue is." I glance behind us to see a big F-350 only about 10 feet behind, so I tell her to speed up, figuring he was just wanting us to go faster, but he keeps the same distance. All of a sudden, he shoots into the oncoming lane and overtakes us, then proceeds to slow down in front of us, bringing his and our speed to only about 10 miles an hour. She backs off a considerable distance when he slams on his brakes and starts opening his door. At this point, I sit all the way back up, I'm a pretty big guy, and roll my window down. He spots me, slams his door shut, and takes off. I'm not one to jump to conclusions, but I feel that if he didn't see me, he would have definitely tried to take my wife. It shook us up pretty bad, and at the next gas station we found, the attendant called it in. Luckily, I got his plate numbers. And that's why you don't drive in the middle of nowhere alone in the middle of the night. You never know who's out there.
A few years ago, my sister and I decided to drive down to San Francisco to meet up with my dad, who was attending some type of tech conference. Having made the drive a number of times before, I knew that we would be good leaving around 3 in the morning to hopefully get there before noon. We make our way south of I-5, going through Corvallis and then through Eugene. We weren't on the road for that long, having just left from Portland. Since it was very early in the morning, it was still very dark out, and we were often the only car on the road. It wasn't until maybe an hour or so into the drive that my sister makes a comment about the car behind us, and the fact that it was so close. I hadn't really noticed it, considering I was so focused on the road ahead. However, as soon as she said something, it did occur to me how bright his lights were, and just how close they were to my car. By now, it's about 4:30, and I start to get this really unsettling feeling in my stomach. I've never had anyone tell me like that, and given the time of day, and the fact that we are the only 2 cars on the road, I'm starting to think that this guy isn't going anywhere. I speed up. He speeds up. I switch lanes. He switches lanes. A few miles down the road, there's another car, and I try to get to the point of where I speed up just enough to overtake the car, then switch lanes so he's sandwiched in between me and the tail. But to no avail. As soon as I switch lanes, he does too. And there's nowhere for us to go. At this point, I'm completely on edge about it, and my sister decides to call the non-emergency police line for assistance. We're just 2 young chicks driving down to Cali, and there's a man following us. My sister gets a dispatch, and they ask the situation. She relays it to them, explaining that she knows it's not a huge deal, but we really didn't know what to do. We're both just really freaked out. The phone call is somewhat reassuring. They tell her not to worry. She did the right thing, and to be on the lookout for a cop down the road. She gets off the phone, and no shit, about 2 miles down, there's not 1, but 2 cop cars waiting. We pass them and they immediately throw their lights on and come whizzing up the road. We watch as they pull the car over behind us and we drive off. We both felt extremely relieved. About 10 minutes later, we get a call back from dispatch, telling us that they searched the car and ran the records, and everything came back clean. The driver's explanation was, I was on my way back from a party, and it was so dark, I was just trying to keep up with them because I was tired. The guy followed us like that for over an hour. I don't know where he was going, but at 4 in the morning, stuff like that's not cool, and I try to trust my gut as much as I can. It's never failed me. To this day, I still get freaked out thinking about it. Today I was at my local Walmart getting a few snack items, as well as a few other random items for game day with the family. I didn't really have a list with me, so I was kind of all over the store trying to carry everything in my hands before deciding to go to the garden section to grab a buggy. From there, I walk over to the cookware aisle and look for bowls. The guy is standing in front of what I'm looking for, so I patiently wait for him to get what he needs. As soon as he does, I get what I need and start walking down the aisle. I notice that the same guy is standing at the end of the aisle across from the one I'm on, and he's staring in my direction. Not sure if he was staring at me or what the deal was, so I just turn at the end of the aisle and go about my business. About 2 minutes later, I hear a guy say, "Excuse me, ma'am." So I turn around and see that same guy walking towards me. I stop and wait for him to walk over to me, thinking he needs some help finding something or maybe I dropped something. Turns out, he came over to let me know that a guy has been watching and following me. I was really taken aback by it and sort of speechless. All I could say was, "Oh my gosh, thank you for letting me know." The gentleman proceeds to tell me what he saw the guy doing. Apparently he was lingering around me, and if I ever turned in his direction, he would move so he wasn't in my line of sight. During this conversation, a lady walked over to us, and I didn't say anything, but I'm assuming she had no idea what was going on. The gentleman told me what the guy was wearing, and sure enough, while talking to the gentleman, the guy following me is walking in our direction. He pointed him out to me, and I indeed recognized seeing him several times. At that moment, I thanked the guy again and said I was going to go ahead and leave, and I appreciate him pointing that out to me. I didn't know what else to say. I was just really creeped out and I didn't know what to think. When I first walked into Walmart, I went straight to the cosmetics, and that's when I first saw him. From there, I looked at some college football items near the back of the store, and then walked over to the grocery section. And that's when I noticed him a second time. After realizing I needed a buggy, I went to the garden section to get one, so I wouldn't have to put everything down in order to walk outside of the store to grab one. I noticed the guy walking into the garden section as I was walking back into the store. From there, I went to the cookware aisle, and again noticed him walk by the aisle while I was waiting on the gentleman to get the items he was looking for. I then noticed him one aisle over as I was walking away. The entire time, he was just lingering on his phone, never actually looking at anything. I never thought anything of it at first because I've gone through Walmart seeing the same people hundreds of times. This time it really did stick out to me because of how sporadic my path through Walmart was. So it's extremely unlikely to run into someone that many times. I didn't think about saying anything to any employees at the time. I honestly just wanted to get the hell out of there. I did, however, contact the store to let them know of my situation, in case he was there creeping on someone else. I also didn't go straight home afterwards, and I kept checking my rear view to see if I was being followed.
This story happened a year ago, when I was 15 on a school trip to San Fran. At the time, I was very immature, not in the sense that you normally would think, but in the sense that I didn't really know how the world worked, and how scary it could be. I attribute this story to me growing up and realizing how the world works. I was rooming with 2 other girls, both were a year older than me, so I didn't really know them well. The way the trip worked, so to say, was that breakfast in the hotel was between 7 and 8, but the chaperones on the trip wouldn't wake us up. So if we wanted to have time to get ready and eat before leaving to explore the city for the day, we had to do it on our own. This meant that in the morning, me and the people in my room didn't see the chaperones till we went down for breakfast, usually around 7:45, since we all took a long time to get ready. However, this day was different. We were all tired of arriving late and having to eat quickly, so we woke up a bit earlier to go down and get breakfast right when it opened. We ate breakfast, and pretty much the rest of the kids on the trip and I headed to the elevators together. This was a mixed group of boys and girls, and my twin brother also happened to be on the trip. So the people in the elevator was him and his friends, me, the girls from my room, and a few of their friends. The elevator door almost closed when two Indian men stuck their hand through the door and stepped inside, squeezing themselves into an already packed elevator. They looked young, maybe 19 or 20. Eventually, we arrived to our floor and got off. So did the men. The way the hotel rooms and hallways were situated was essentially just a square. You could go either direction and eventually make it back to the elevator if you just turn left or right 3 times. The people on my trip went right, and the men went left. Eventually, my brother and his friends trickled off into their rooms, and it was just me and one of the other girls on the trip, because the other girl had went into one of the boys' rooms. We were right at our rooms when we encountered the men again. At first, we didn't notice anything wrong. They were probably just trying to find their room. I turned away from them and tried to find my room key in my wallet. Now, at this point, my immature brain didn't notice anything wrong, but my roommate did. I could see the panic in her eyes, and as I turned to look at the men, I realized they weren't looking for their room. They were looking for us. My heart began to race and we panicked, each fumbling for our cards to get in the room as quick as possible. But they were moving towards us too quickly. We were standing there, pressed against our door, as these 2 men stepped closer to us and got within a foot of our faces. Their English wasn't the best, so they slowly asked us what we were doing. I couldn't speak. I didn't know what to do in this situation, so my roommate spoke up. She tried her best not to let them know that this was our room, but it was pretty obvious at that point. She stuttered something about trying to get into her friend's room, but these men clearly weren't there just to know what she was doing. I could tell they were there for something more sinister. One of the men continued to stare at me and eye me up and down when the other one got really close to my roommate and asked her for her number. She stood up tall and quickly said, "No, I'm sorry you cannot," but her voice trailed off as her confidence wore off. At last I spoke, explaining that we were underage and that we were on a school trip, and that we couldn't. They didn't take no for an answer. At that point, I slowly started to pull my room key from my wallet. Luckily, my friend pushed the card into my wallet and made me push my hand holding the wallet behind my back. At the time I was confused why she didn't want us to go into our room, but now I realized she had more intuition about these men than I did. She knew that if we opened the door with them right there, that they would force themselves in there with us, and who knows what would happen. Eventually they backed off far enough where we felt like we could escape from them. She grabbed my wrist and pulled me along the hallway, and we sprinted towards the elevator. Along the way we ran into my brother and one of his friends. We quickly explained to them what happened, and they sprinted with us to the elevators. Once we were there, quickly pressing the elevator's buttons to get downstairs where the chaperones were, we encountered the men again. I clutched onto my brother's arm, and my roommate did the same to my brother's friend. They just stood there on the other side of the hallway, staring at us, and quickly walking towards us. It looked like they were just pretending to be normal hotel patrons in front of the boys, but we knew what they really were. They were creepy and we weren't risking it. Finally, the elevator opened, and I don't think I've ever clicked the closed door button so fast. Right as the man got to the elevator, the door closed. Thank God. We thought our ordeal was over, but it wasn't. There were multiple elevators in the hotel. My brother, his friend, my roommate, and I had just got into the breakfast hall where most of our group and chaperones were when we realized the men were there too. They had followed us. They started off staying across the room from us, but were getting closer. We left the room and went back up to our rooms. Once there, my roommate and I were panicking. They knew where our room was. They knew our floor. They could find us at any time, and we didn't know what to do. Our panic was cut short as the phone rang. At this hotel, you could call other people's rooms, and we thought it was from one of the boys' rooms, playing a joke on us. We were wrong. When we picked up the phone, it was just heavy breathing and a quiet laughter. We hung up the phone after about 20 seconds. I called my brother and his friend and asked them if they could meet us outside the room. They walked us to the elevators and back downstairs. On the way, we told them about the phone call. My brother's friend took responsibility for it. My roommate believed him, but I didn't. I knew they wouldn't freak us out like that. They were trying to calm us down. Once downstairs again, still shaking, we told one of the chaperones about the two men, and they freaked out. We told the front desk about the men, but since we didn't know what room they were in, or their names, they told us there wasn't much they could do about it. They tried to reassure us that there was a group staying there that they were probably a part of, and that they were leaving in a few days. It didn't calm us down though. Thankfully we never saw them again, and I never want to. This is the first time I talked about this, besides to my mom when this happened, and to my friend. Anyway, I was in 6th grade, maybe 12 or 13. My friend Gabby made plans for a party at her house. She invited everyone that sat at our table during lunch. School ended, and I head home to change, and then walked to her house, which was 2 blocks away. I went to one of the food trucks that was outside my home. These food trucks sell soda, chips, and are basically corner stores on wheels, and they are very common in my area. I bought some sodas and then began my walk to her house. During my walk, I noticed this white pickup truck that had equipment in the bed which was sticking out. The truck also had scratches which stood out, seeing that the truck was white. It was just a creepy truck is what I'm trying to say. I see the driver looking at me, and I noticed that he slowed down as he passed me. When he was in my view, he gave me a creepy smile and waved to me. For some crazy reason, I thought it could be a family member, so I waved back awkwardly. He stopped waving, and somehow his smile grew wider. He turned the corner, and I continued walking. Not even a minute later, as I'm down the block, I see the same truck down the street and coming towards me. So I decided to run to a more open part of the street where there were always people around. I stopped by the corner of the block, and thank God there was another food truck there. Seeing how there's always a person in them, I just stayed by the truck. As I'm standing there, I turn to see the white truck parked by my side of the street, only a few feet away. The guy is looking at me and calling me over. I wanted to tell the lady from the food truck that this guy was following me, but as soon as I started talking to her, the truck drove away. What really freaks me out is that he followed me. The way the street works, for him to get back to find me, he had to go around a whole block, make a turn, and then get back to me. And he did this in under a minute, so he must have been speeding and very eager or something. I went to my friend's house and told her what happened. I called my mom, and she said that she would walk with me everywhere for a while. Luckily, I never saw this guy again.